Assalamu alaikum, everybody. My name is Will Coley. This is La Ikrah Fi Din, Islam and the Non-Aggression Principle. I'm the National Director of Muslims for Liberty. I'm also the host of the Call of the Rebel radio show on the Voluntary Virtues Network, and I work with Cop Block East Tennessee. Most people, when they hear NAP, the last thing that they think of is Islam. Like, when you think of aggression, usually, the first thing you think of is Islam. And there's actually a problem with that. Most of it has to do with politics, has nothing to do with faith. There's a central statement in the Quran. La Ikrah Fi Din. It means let there be no coercion in deen. Now, a lot of people, if you read the Quran, it will translate this word deen, as religion, where most scholars, particularly linguists, will tell you that in Arabic, to try to translate a word that simply is impossible. The word deen doesn't mean a single word. It means a sentence, a statement, way of life. Complete way of life, from the way that you go to the bathroom, to the way that you interact with people, to the way that you deal with politics. Deen is what you do. What is it that you devote yourself to? What is it that you devote your life to? That is what your deen is. So as we see here, some people's deen is the Democrat Party. We all know that. Statism is a religion, and their religion is the Democrat Party. They're willing to throw every principle they have out the window immediately as soon as their party says, well, this is okay now, or this is wrong now. Anything that they once advocated, if the party says it's now something we should advocate against, they'll turn on a dime and immediately advocate against it. Some people are Republicans. That's their deen. Politics is their deen. It's their way of life. It's what they do. It's a religion to them. And we decided to put this presentation together to kind of introduce people to what my deen is. What's my deen? My deen is Islam. I'd love to know what your deen is. That's part of what this campaign that we've started, the What's Your Deen campaign, is about. Is about taking this concept, La Ikrah Fi Din, let there be no coercion in this way of life, and finding a way to spread that everywhere that we can. Take it and turn it into a magi. Where's it at? Hold on. Give me 1 second. I lost this guy's mouse. Ah, okay. Can you click on the Arabic writing one? It says calligraphy, I believe. Now, most people don't realize that a lot of the ideas that we advocate as libertarians, voluntarists, anarchists, anti-statists exist, sometimes actually originated in Islam. Most of the concepts that are the foundations of the common law, which a lot of us would probably advocate because it's a privately enforced law without the need of the state. Most of the things that came into the common law were actually borrowed from the Islamic legal tradition. Now, this isn't my own personal opinion. There's a legal historian, his name's John McDesey, and I know the quote, but to make sure that I get it exactly correct, let me read it off of the paper for you. He wrote a thesis called The Islamic Connection to Common Law. And in it he wrote, the Islamic legal system was far superior to the primitive legal systems of England and Europe before the birth of common law. It was only natural for the more primitive systems to look to the more sophisticated systems, as it developed three institutions that played a major role in the creation of the common law. The action of debt, aqd, the assize of novel dissension, or istihaq, and the trial by jury, or lafif, all introduced mechanisms for a far more rational, sophisticated legal process that existed only in Islamic law at the time of the formulation of the common law. So what McDesey does in his thesis is he actually traces that history that shows, well, how did that information get from over there to over here? And there were two avenues that he follows. The first is the Crusades. During the time of the Crusades, Europeans came to the quote-unquote Muslim lands where the works of Socrates and Aristotle and Plato and all of the Greek philosophers from before had been being studied for 300 or 400 years by philosophers in Muslim countries. Scholars like Ibn Rushd, Ibn Muqabbadan, Al-Qarafi. These are different Muslim jurists, legal scholars, and philosophers who lived in Iraq or in Cairo or in Medina, different periods of time between the 9th and 12th centuries. So when the Crusaders come, they go back home eventually. And when they go back home, they take trailer loads of books with them, of all this knowledge that they got while they were there. Well, the ones that they didn't burn when they first got there. And they took all these books back home. And their philosophers started reading them and translating them into Latin. Also, while they were there, during the Third Crusade, Salahuddin al-Ayyubid was the quote-unquote political leader of the Muslim community at that time. He had taken what previously was basically an anarchist society all the way across North Africa and the Middle East after the collapse of the Umayyad Caliphate. There was no centralized government for 200 years in the Muslim world, none. There were small pockets and mostly tribal leaderships, and it was, they arbitrated through civil contract. One tribe would make a contract with the other tribe. We won't harm each other. We will keep peace between our two tribes, and if any tribe attacks either one of us, we'll defend each other. And those networks grew bigger and bigger until by the time the Crusades got here, you had a network of small private contracts that stretched all the way from Morocco to the modern-day Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Israel, the Holy Land, all the way across. But no centralized leadership, no king, no emperor. So when the Crusades happened, and Muslim historians kind of blame the lack of centralized leadership on the fact the Crusades were even possible, because without a centralized leadership means no centralized army, which means no giant military force to expel over 30,000 Europeans who suddenly just show up with weapons and they want to kill anybody. They don't really care if they're Muslim or Jewish or Christian. You know, if you're there and you're in the way, then they were happy to exterminate. The other avenue after the Crusades, actually, wait, hold on a second. Let me finish that thought. While Salahuddin was in charge, the Europeans who were there got the opportunity to see what proper Islamic leadership, or something similar to proper Islamic leadership, should look like. And they noticed that Salahuddin was a man among men, though by their own understanding, he was a king. From their perception, he was the top dog political leader of the area. So to them, he was like a king. But he was still accountable to the law the same way as everybody else was. So if he committed theft, if he went and he stole someone's property, he could be prosecuted before the courts in the exact same manner as anyone else. He'd need the same amount of witnesses, the same amount of evidence, and if there was the slightest bit of doubt in his case prosecuting, they would dismiss his case. There's a famous story, as a matter of fact, in Tariq al-Khulafa, which was written by At-Tabari, where he talks about Ali ibn Abu Talib. He was the son-in-law of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he was the fourth of what's known as the Rashidun, which were the four leaders to succeed after the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam died. And while he's in this position of leadership, there was a civil war. It was Democrat versus monarchy would be the easiest way to put it. You had one group that believed leadership should follow family line lineage, and one side that thought that the community should pick leaders. And that literally created a civil war. Well, when he came back from one of these battles, he had a suit of armor that was missing, and he saw a Jewish guy walking through town who was wearing this suit of armor. So he walked up and he accused him of theft in the middle of the street. And the Jewish man said, no, I swear to God, I didn't steal this. And he's like, well, I didn't give it to you and I didn't sell it to you, so I call you a thief. They say, okay, well, let's go and let's let the judge decide. So they go before the Qadi. His name escapes me right now. I've got it written down over here. And he tells Ali, well, if you're bringing the charges, then it's on you. That's the way it works in Islam. Presumption of innocence. The first qaida, the first foundation of Islamic jurisprudence is al-aslu bara'a al-dhimma. The norm of Sharia is non-liability, that you are not liable for any action until it's proven beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law that you are. Now, unfortunately, most Muslim countries today have literally just tossed that out because, states, how they like to throw things away that don't, centralize their power. And, excuse me. And what happened was Ali goes before the judge and with this Jewish guy, and he presents the charges. He says, okay, well, present your witnesses then, Ali, because you have to prove your case. And Ali says, okay, well, I've got this guy and I have my son, Hassan, who can testify on my behalf. And the judge says, is that it? He says, yes, that's it. Case closed. Jewish guy wins. Get out of my courtroom. That's simple. He looks at the Khala, at Ali, and he says, you know that the testimony of a son is not admissible in court on behalf of a father. This is the top political leader. This is a non-Muslim. This is a Jew. So stereotypically, what's supposed to happen here? Muslim king versus Jewish normal person. What's supposed to happen? Is the judge supposed to throw his case out of court and tell him the Jewish guy gets to keep the armor and you need to go back and make a better case if you want to be in my courtroom? That's definitely not what would happen here. If a very well-connected political leader were to do something illegal or commit theft or accuse someone of theft, they win. It's the end of the story. So this shows that concept, and those ideas were brought in over time. The other avenue that brought these ideas in, according to Professor McDeasy, is a gentleman by the name of Thomas Brown. Now, if any of you guys have ever studied any English history, particularly about how the numbers we use today, became a part of the English lexicon, Thomas Brown. Thomas Brown brought those numbers with him. He actually was a Qadi in Muslim-occupied Sicily under King Roger II. And when Roger II died, he left Sicily and came to work as the Royal Exchequer for King Henry II of England. And the theory that McDeasy puts forth, and it's very logical, is that having been a judge in an Islamic court before, where these ideas of presumption of innocence, the right to a trial, the right to face your accuser, these kind of things were there, he brought those ideas with him to England because they were in his head. No one else would have had these ideas because they would not have been exposed to them. He, on the other hand, had literally worked in court systems and spent years and years and years learning these jurisprudential ideas. So when he came to England and worked with King Henry II, the theory is well, common law just happened to come around at the same exact time. So logic would dictate that if someone who has these ideas shows up in England and a few years later there's a common law that has all those ideas and nobody else had those ideas, logic would dictate, well, they probably came from this guy. And that's a history, unfortunately, that's been lost. And it's like if I looked at anybody here in the audience, what are the 5 foundations of law in Islam? I don't know. Yeah, exactly. That's the same response I get from any Muslim I ask that question to that's not like a sheikh. I mean, and literally, like, I could ask some Muslims, like 16-year-old kid named Muhammad, know 10 surahs of Quran by heart and ask him how to wash for prayer, and they give me the same answer. So this is the level that we're dealing with. Like, you see the level of ignorance in your national community as far as politics and what's really going on in the world is concerned. That's the level of ignorance in the Muslim community about their own faith. Literally. When you go to a Muslim and you say, hey, did you know that the first foundation of jurisprudence in Islam is the presumption of innocence? No, I didn't know that. Well, why not? It's a central component of your faith. Brother, I barely pray. I barely know how to pray. That's what we're dealing with here. So when you confront a Muslim online, you see these things happen all the time. People confront a Muslim. Oh, blah, blah, blah. The people you're debating with have no idea what they're talking about any more than you do. I mean, literally. If you quote a verse of Quran out of context, they're not going to know any better than you do most of the time, because they probably haven't read the whole book from cover to cover either. Even though it's Ramadan is the end of this week and you're supposed to read the Quran from cover to cover every Ramadan. It's split into 30 equal sections specifically so you can. I probably know 3 Muslims that do it. And I know thousands and thousands of Muslims. I know like 3 that are open about the fact that, like, I do it and you should too. So, I mean, that's the kind of thing we're dealing with in our community, just like every other religious community is dealing with it. So what we do is we come out here and we say, La ikrah fi din. This is the basis of our faith, La ikrah fi din. This statement, the context of the revelation of this statement is beautiful. There was the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and the community of the Muslims were in Mecca. They were being driven out, murdered, tortured. It was awful. Give up your Islam or we'll torture you to death. Give up your Islam or we'll put economic sanctions on your family and no one will trade with you. They literally, for, was it 2 years? Starved them out. Starved them out. No one would trade with them at all. You couldn't trade food, nothing. No trade. They like economic sanctions. They said if they're Muslim and you trade with them, then we won't trade with you either. And they tried to starve the community out. So the community fled to Medina. They were actually Yathrib at the time. They were invited by a few tribes that were there. They were having some kind of a squabble with each other. They wanted the Prophet ﷺ to come and act as a mediator. And in return for that mediation, his community could come there and live and find a safe place to stay. And when that happened, there was a tribe called the Ansar. And there were lots and lots of Christians in the Ansar tribe. And what happened was when they converted, they immediately went home and tried to forcefully convert their children. I'm not talking like they're 30-year-old. I'm talking their children. They're 10-year-olds. Okay, most people would argue that this is the age where you should have the ability to influence the lives of your children and point them in the direction that you want them to go. Well, that's where the revelation of this specific revelation came from. These Ansar were attempting to force their children to give up the Christian deen that they had grown up in and accept this new deen of Islam. And the verse was revealed, La ikrah fi din. Let there be no coercion in faith. Truth stands clear from falsehood. Let those who will believe, believe, and those who will reject, reject. That's the context of this. This verse came down because parents were trying to make their children, one more, their children. It's that big of a deal. The concept of non-aggression, particularly in ways of life, intellect, understanding, is so paramount. You can't even try to tell your kids what to do as far as this is concerned. It's that major. Again, though, it's been lost. Like, we literally just gave it up. About 100 years ago, there was an effort to centralize power, change the power, in the Middle East. And through that, we were given this wonderful thing that we've inherited today with the violence that we see. That's where this all came from. You had communities that were living together peacefully. You can find photographs all over the internet of how beautiful the area was and how modern and how everything was normal and fine until the West decided to use that area as their personal chessboard, to where they could fight proxy wars with each other in different countries and have literally just destroyed everything, including the culture, and rebuilt something new. To where now the only thing that people in the culture care about is, well, who's going to resist the other side? Who's going to resist the oppressors? What they have to say doesn't really matter anymore. Are you willing to fight the guys that are killing my kids? Yes. Well, then I support you. I don't care what other crazy thing that you've come up with, because you want to stop people from killing my children. And that's where we are today. We're in a situation where generational violence has created a situation where people are so desperate that they're willing to throw away everything that they believe in, the most basic central principles of themselves and of their faith, just in order to survive. That's what's brought us to where we are today. Violence in a civil society. Interventionism. The belief that one group knows better for what's for the other group than the other group does. I want to see this as big as Imagi. This is a 1,400-year-old formulation of the non-aggression principle. Let there be no coercion in deen. Let there be no coercion in this way of life. That sounds like the non-aggression principle to me. No coercion in ideology. That sounds pretty nap in my personal opinion. I mean, I could be wrong if somebody else sees let there be no coercion as something other than the non-aggression principle. And this is what we reintroduced to the Muslim community. I spend hours of my time studying books of Islamic jurisprudence. Hours and hours. Trust me, there's way more books than I could ever even begin to try to read in my lifetime. In more languages that I could ever attempt to try to learn. From Persian to Farsi to Urdu to Pashtun to Hindi to Arabic just tons and tons of languages. There's no way anyone could ever become an expert to the level that your average Fox News terror analyst claims to be. You know, I know Hamza Yusuf and Suhaib Webb, and they're not as big of an expert as Brigitte Gabriel claims to be. So that's how I was able to find these things. But the average Muslim doesn't do that. The average Muslim does the same thing that everybody else does. They get up, they take a dump, take a shower, put on their clothes, go to work, come home, take care of their kids, go to a worship service once a week if they're lucky, and that's it. You know, they do the same thing that everybody else does. They don't have time to sit and study books that were written 600, 800, 1,200 years ago. They're not interested in that. They're interested in how am I going to get my bills paid and how am I going to keep people from trying to run my wife off the road while she's wearing a headscarf. That's what they're worried about. They're not worried about doing the things that I'm doing. When I started studying fiqh, it was specifically because brothers in my community told me, this is a lost art. Somebody in the Muslim community needs not only to study this, but to study this from our perspective, from the perspective of someone born in the United States, someone raised here, someone who never had any of the cultural baggage, wasn't raised in an immigrant home where mom and dad are from Pakistan or from India or from Qatar, and they brought that cultural baggage with them to the U.S., and now it's in the house with the kids. Even though the kids are growing up here, that cultural baggage, you know, that stone around their neck is still there. It's in the house, so they can't get away from it yet. The next generation after that gets away from it. I know those kids. I know some of them are adults, and I know some of their kids. That next generation, they finally are able to get away from it. But you've got 2 generations of cultural baggage, like no matter what you do. Like there's nothing you can really do about it. It's just there. It's a part of it. It's, you know. And that's what happens here is the Muslims get to get away from that. Like when you convert to Islam in the U.S., there is no cultural baggage. Like I don't have a dog in the Sunni Shia fight at all. Like when I see these people fighting with each other and screaming at each other, I'm like, do you guys not realize like they're bombing your country and they're bombing your country too? And it's the same people. Why y'all fighting with each other? Like, you see that plane? Yeah, he's dropping a bomb on your house and he gonna fly over to the next country and he gonna drop a bomb on your house too. So the plane and the bomb, they don't see Sunni or Shia or Sufi, Salafi. They don't see any of that. All they see is, oh, look, brown people. So I don't understand the fight. I don't understand the conflict. I mean, I know the history of it. But why Muslims are literally willing to advocate for the killing of children. Like, oh, but they're Shia, it's okay. Oh, but they're Sunni, it's okay. No, it's not. La ikrah fi din. Where does any of that, where does you get to kill someone's children because they have an ideological difference on a viewpoint of who should secede to a political position? Where does la ikrah fi din fit into that? Quran tells you there's no coercion in faith. There's no coercion in this way of life. If there's no coercion, that includes killing somebody's children. That includes deciding that you want to pull an ISIS and we're going to overrun a country and just start murdering everybody in our pathway, from women and children to military, whatever it is. None of that. What does that have to do with a central statement? This is from Surah Al-Baqarah. Most people, most people, that means nothing. Surah Al-Baqarah is the longest chapter of the Quran for a reason. All the legal stuff is in that chapter. All your inheritance law, your marriage law, dietary guidelines, all of that stuff is in chapter 2. And along with all the very important stuff is this statement right here. La ikra fi din. Central statement, central book. Chapter with all the law. La ikra fi din. What time are we at? 9:41. All right. Now, before I go to Q&A, I gave a much better version of this speech in Atlanta, and we did a little exercise. I'm going to teach you guys a little bit of Arabic, and then we're going to have a little bit of fun, and then I'm going to let you guys ask me all the questions you want until somebody tells me to shut up. So I'm going to teach you guys this. And the way it is, it's la, ikra, Fidin. La ikra fidin. All right, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to point at you, and you guys say that, and then I've got a little pocket full of things that I'm going to throw out there to try to drive the point home so that you guys really understand what I'm saying, and the audience that watches this online, they really get the idea of what I'm saying about what that is. So let's see if we can try this one time. Because badges don't grant extra rights. Because what you put in your body is your own personal business and not the business of anyone else or the state. Because who you choose to have personal contracts with or spend the rest of your life with is also nobody's business but yours, not the business of the state. Because nonviolence is beautiful. It's the way of life we have chosen. It's the way of life I've chosen, and it's all that we'll accept. Yeah, right? Let me get a big one. All right, it's Q&A time. Thank you, guys. If you got a question, I guess just like raise your hand. Maybe Kevin will be nice enough to hand the microphone around.
Okay, somebody else is going to have to hand the mic around. Any volunteers? Okay, so I have to run, but maybe you can explain this to the people. There, la ikrah fi din, which is no compulsion in religion, is the usual translation, is sort of one pole of thought, and the other pole is to command the good and forbid the bad. So where do you draw the distinction between those two? Where is it that you actually have to command, and what does command mean? Does it involve force or not, et cetera, et cetera? And I'm going to let you tell them because I know I'll talk to you personally about this later.
Sure, yeah. The term he's actually talking about, the usual translation is enjoin to good and forbid evil. Well, there's lots of different ways. We enjoin to good and forbid evil, and we don't have to commit violence to do it. We stand up and we speak out against it. We write against it. It bothered us within ourselves. We pray or meditate or, whatever it is that we do, that we internalize what's going on as far as the evils that we see in the world. Now, when violence happens, it's completely justifiable to meet violence with violence. If someone forcefully attacks you or your family, tries to harm you in some way, you have a right to protect yourself. If they're coming at you with violence, then you have the right to protect yourself with violence. There's actually a famous hadith that a man comes to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he says, "You've said that aggressive violence is something we should avoid, but what if someone comes and tries to take my property?" He says, "Well, then you should resist him." He says, "Well, what if he tries to harm me?" He says, "Well, then you should fight." He says, "Well, but what if he kills me?" "Then you will be a martyr." So martyrdom is actually directly connected to the protection of personal property. And the right to resist evil that comes against you and tries to take your property. Like, you have that right. Now, do you have the right to preemptively, like, oh, I think that person might do something bad, so I'm going to... No, that's not the way it works. The way the Quran explains it is it's all about equity. If you slap me in the face on Tuesday, I have the right to slap you in the face on Tuesday. It's equity. If you take this much of my property, then I have a right to restitution for the same amount. Not more, not the same amount plus some criminal punishment. It has to be equitable. The way the Quran puts it in chapter 9, I want to say verse 9, says that violations are for likewise violations. So if someone attacks during the holy month, you have a right to fight during the holy months. You know, because there was this whole big thing during the time of the Prophet in the Battle of Hudaybiyah, where it was Ramadan, which is a time that historically the Arabs would not fight. It was supposed to be like this lull time, like Tet in Korea and Vietnam was supposed to be this lull time that people wouldn't fight. And because of that, the Meccans knew that. The Meccans attacked Medina during Ramadan because they knew they would not have their defenses up. They would be thinking that everything would be fine. And so it came down. They've attacked you during these holy months. Don't abstain from fighting during the holy month because they've attacked you. Defend yourselves. Stand and defend yourselves. Don't let them overrun you. So any action against you is you have the right to resist in a likewise fashion. Now, I'm surprised that Kevin didn't mention it because it kind of goes along with this, is that there are three things that are required of a Muslim when they see oppression. You should either physically fight against it, stand up in the face of oppression and fight against it. The Prophet ﷺ is reported to have said, the greatest jihad is to speak a word of truth before a tyrant. So you have to stand up and fight against it physically if you can. Or speak out against it openly. Go and rally against it. Do what we do. Go to events and write about it. Advocate against it. Or, at the very, very least, you must feel bad about it within yourself and pray about it. Internalize it. Condemn it within yourself and pray for the release of the oppression of these people. But, the atheists in here are going to love this. That is the least of faith. So just sitting around and feeling bad about something and praying that God will fix it for you is actually the worst thing that you could possibly do. Like, it's allowed. You know, you could do that. You could just sit there and pray about it and hope that everything works out on its own. But that's the least of faith. True faith takes you standing up on your feet, going out there and doing something about it yourself. Anybody else?
In Christianity, we have these ideas that although we have the right to respond to force with force, you have Jesus saying, do not resist a wicked person. You have two apostles saying, do not repay evil for evil, or it's actually translated better, violence for violence. Is there anything like that in Islam, which is like, even though you may respond with violence to violence, there is a better way, and it's better to be peaceful and to forgive?
Yeah, there's actually some really famous stories that go along that line. When that whole the video thing came out, Benghazi, that everybody's all still up in an uproar over, I saw sermon after sermon after sermon after sermon from all these different big name scholars all over the world, and they were talking about that return evil with good. God cannot be merciful to those who do not have mercy on others. God does not forgive those who cannot show forgiveness to others. These are statements that are attributed to the Prophet Muhammad _. So there is that idea that you should return bad with good. There's actually a famous story where Aisha, and the wife of the Prophet, and he were walking through town one day, and a man passed by them and said, "Assalamu alaikum." Now that sounds similar to Assalamu alaikum, but it's not the same. It's Assalamu alaikum. It's a different enunciation of the vowel sound in the throat. What it means is poison be upon you. Right? So basically, like, they're walking along. The Prophet ﷺ just ignores it, like, whatever. But his wife, on the other hand, she kind of flips a little bit. And she just turns around and says, and may death and curses and poison and just everything she could think of be upon you too. And he turns like, La Aisha, la, no. Calm down. And she says, did you not hear what he just said to you? She says, calm down. I responded. He said, wa yakum, and to you. No need for, F you stupid, blah, I should kill you and your family and your children, blah, blah, blah. There's no need for all that. Wa yakum. If you said something derogatory to me, and back to you. Whatever. I'm rubber and you glue, basically. Like the little 4-year-old thing. Whatever. Can't even be bothered by you. That's the way we're supposed to respond to these things. Like these idiots teddy bear riding over videos in the Middle East and burning down buildings. Like this is not the example of the Prophet ﷺ, specifically because you're not supposed to burn down buildings even in warfare. Like there's 10 rules of war, and one of the rules is you don't burn things down. It's like it's central to the rules of war. You don't burn things down. You don't blow things up. You don't use fire in any way, shape, form, or fashion ever, period. It's like a strict, direct commandment from Allah. Fire is no. I mean, you can use it to cook food with, but you never use it, not even on animals that are alive. I mean, cook, of course. But like there's a story where they're traveling and the Sahaba saw an anthill and set it on fire. And the Prophet ﷺ was, who did this? No, you don't do this. You never use fire, even against something as simple as a bug. So look at the Middle East right now and tell me, are any of the central rules of warfare being followed? You're not allowed to cut down trees or destroy infrastructure. Bombs kind of do that. You're not allowed to target civilian populations. Anyone who's not literally physically fighting you at the time. I see a whole lot of that going on. You're not allowed to destroy infrastructure. Well, we're batting 1,000 so far. You're not allowed to target religious people, particularly priests and scholars, churches. We're not doing so well on that one right now, are we? There's so many things. You're not allowed to cut down trees. You're not allowed to destroy livestock. There's so many rules, and all of them are violated. Just the first time a Muslim, quote unquote, Muslim country drops a bomb, that's the end of their military use being in following with what Islam allows. The first time a bomb hits the ground and goes boom, and fire comes out everywhere, that is no longer a war that can say that it has any kind of an Islamic sanction because they used fire. I mean, it's literally that simple. That's the reason why the Ayatollah of Iran made a legal juristic opinion, they call them fatwas, about nuclear weapons and said there is no way on earth a nuclear weapon could be permissible because you're not allowed to burn a farm. A nuclear weapon destroys everything wholesale that makes the earth to where it's not even useful anymore. How could a nuclear weapon be in that, like a Muslim country be like, I want a nuke so I can nuke people? Because it's literally like, there's like 8 rules of warfare and you're violating just with the fact that you want to use a nuclear bomb. I mean, you got 10 rules, you've just violated 8 of them. And then you still want to say, this is a religiously sanctioned war, Allahu Akbar, I'm fighting in the way of Allah. Really? Well, you're violating all the rules that were sent down to you for how you're allowed to conduct this kind of thing. If you want to fight and resist oppression, do so, but do it the right way. And fight the people that are actually oppressing you. Don't go blow up the mosque down the street or go burn down the church in the other town. Fight the people with the guns that are shooting at you. So, I mean, that's the way we're supposed to do it. If someone comes at you and tries to attack you, you can fight back, but forgiveness is always better. That's what the Prophet always said, over and over again, that you have the right to self-defense, but forgiveness is always better. That's the reason why a lot of people cite Surah 9:5. They're like, the verse of the sword, to kill all the non-Muslims. Why not read Surah 9:4, the one that comes before that? Or the verse that comes 2 verses after it, that lay out that, yes, you can fight, but no, it's only in self-defense. And if they decide they don't want to fight anymore, that's the end of the fight. Even if the treaty is not in your favor, that's the end of the fight, because peace is what comes first. The Muslims on 2 separate occasions had treaties that were not in their favor. They were not in their favor at all. And the Prophet ﷺ accepted those treaties against the wishes of the community. It actually caused a group of religious pilgrims to be murdered and caused another war later. But because of the fact that peace was paramount, he took something that actually put him at a loss. So there's lots of stories, I guess you could say, that represent that idea. Anybody else? Anybody?
Okay, all right. I know there's lots and lots of writings, Muslim writings. How does the Quran and those writings relate to each other? Basically, is the Quran the final book, or are there supplement books that are equally as important?
Well, it really depends on who you talk to. Like, you have Salafis that are super, super focused on the Hadith traditions. And most of them, the really funny thing is none of them have any usuli training whatsoever. Like, they don't understand how to verify an isnad. An isnad is a chain of narration. Like, these are things that were written down 300 years after they were said, or supposedly said. And they were passed down like oral tradition over and over and over again. So what happened was they created this science to verify. But the science is spotty and has actually changed over the course of time. So, like, you've got books that were declared everything from cover to cover, like Bukhari, as Sahih, that now we know that, like, 45% of Bukhari is not Sahih. Or, at the very least, it's not quite Sahih. Like, you've got known liars and chains and broken chains, you know, things that would never have been accepted by modern Usuli scholars, or even by Usuli scholars that came 200 years after him. You know, one glaring example is the hadith that's used for apostasy. It's literally a rumor passed down by a known liar who was an enemy, who worked with the enemy of the person he was saying it about. Basically, it says that Ikrimah said, I heard Ibn Abbas say that he saw Ali ibn Abu Talib burn a group of apostates. Now, if you read, it's in like 4 different books, but it's written differently in each book. And the last one, you actually get to hear what Ali says. And it gets back to Ali, and Ali says, woe unto Ibn Abbas. Now, this is rated as a Sahih Hadith. It's like that close to being as highly viewed as Quran. It was literally given by someone who was known to be a liar. Like, every scholar that you read about that came after Bukhari has just all kinds of stuff where they're like, I didn't trust Ikrimah because of this. I didn't trust Ikrimah because of this. There's actually a hadith where the son of Ibn Abbas has him tied to a post by the neck in front of his house. And a guy comes up and he's like, oh, son of Ibn Abbas, fear Allah, what have you done? He says, this man has attributed false narrations to my father's name. Yet, I know he's known to be a liar, but it's still there. And it's still used as though he were not now known to be a liar. Because that old tradition and that old, especially the Salafis, they're like, they don't want anything past Ibn Taymiyyah. Like, once you get to Ibn Taymiyyah, they don't care what anybody else said. It's like there's no other scholars that exist on earth until you tell them that Ibn Taymiyyah talked about times when it was okay for women to lead the prayer. And then their heads explode. You know? So the Quran is the discerning book. It's Al-Furqan. That's the word that the Quran gives itself. Al-Furqan, the discerning book. If you see something in the hadith and it contradicts what's in the Quran, well, that hadith is invalid. It's simple and plain. If the Quran says only fight in self-defense, and this hadith over here says that you can fight just because you feel like it, the Quran overrules that hadith. Simple and plain. That's just, because one is what people wrote that they think the Prophet ﷺ said, and the other is direct revelation from God to the Prophet Muhammad. So one's the word of God, and the other one is we think it might have been, could have been the Prophet's words, but we're not sure, maybe. We're going to create this science to try to validate it. So you do have these other writings. One of them that I think is really interesting, Tabari has a book, The History is what it's called. Now, most of your anti-Muslim types, if you read their articles, they quote Tabari constantly, like that's their favorite book to quote. But I was asking, well, could you read me what the first page says? Because they've never read the book, they're just digging on the internet. They're putting in keywords and the word Islam at the end of it, and they're trying to dig, they're looking for something. They're reading what they want out of it. Well, the very first page of Tariqa Tabari says, don't take anything that you read in this book seriously, because I didn't verify any of the information here at all. This is literally just stories that we got from everybody. There's Zoroastrians and Jews and Christians and Shias and Sunnis and Sufis, and I asked anybody that was willing to talk to tell me a story that they knew about the Prophet ﷺ. So you don't know. It says right there in the very first page, none of this is verified. It's not a book of history like what you get in, well, I guess it is kind of like a book of history you get in a public school. So, but they cite this as though it's the Quran itself. Like this book says. I'm like, well, what's the first page of that book say? I don't know. Well, maybe you should read a book instead of reading polemic websites. You might get a little further. Actually know what you're talking about. Anybody else? Is this gentleman over here, or you just want me to be quiet? You're the next speaker? Be quiet and get down. Okay. Is it 9 o'clock, bro? Time for me to shut up? Oh, I should have been off of here a couple minutes ago. I do apologize to the next speaker for keeping you guys. Thank you for coming out. I really appreciate all of your attendance, especially early in the morning. I know everybody up was. I heard the party down at the bottom of the hill. I know y'all were up pretty late last night, so I do appreciate y'all getting up early and coming and letting me chew on your ear for a little while. And thanks again to PorcFest and the Free State Project and the production crews that put everything together for us, to Liam for doing our electronics. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And y'all have a great day and enjoy the rest of the festival.